Thank you all, first of all, for taking the time to log into our second EV forum, which is Electrification in Action. I'm Rachel Patterson, the Climate and Legislative Associate at Environmental Advocates New York, and we're putting on this forum on behalf of Electrify NY, which is a coalition, a statewide coalition that focuses on environmental justice, electrification specifically of public transit, good jobs, and social justice. And our last forum focused on what the Capital District is doing so far to electrify and what steps municipalities in general can take to transition to an electric vehicle future. So today we'll be digging into how that work actually gets done. We'll be hearing from Lucas Rogers from the Albany County Executive's Office, Sandy Misowicz from the Capital District Transportation Committee, Rich Volo, who's a former alderman in the city of Hudson, and Tara Donadio from the Capital District Regional Planning Commission. And we will have a question and answer portion at the end so that you can ask questions of the panelists, but also feel free to write them in the chat and we will collect them that way. I would also like to say, if you are not a panelist speaking, please mute yourself, as this session will be recorded here on Zoom and I believe on Facebook Live as well. And so with that, I will hand it over to Lucas.
All righty, thank you, Rachel. If you want, are you controlling the slides?
Amanda's controlling the slides today.
All right, Amanda, so I'll just give you a go ahead whenever I need to skip, but I want to thank you. I want to thank Rachel, Environmental Advocates, for hosting this event and for focusing on this region. I think it's appropriate that I go first because of the panelists, I'm definitely the least expert. It's a great panel, and but what I can do is talk a little bit about our experience and what we're trying to do next. So I'm still seeing the front. Okay, so that's welcome slide. Thanks for using our picture. We appreciate that in the in the promo. And obviously, I want to thank the county executive for making this a priority for Albany County and giving us the go-ahead to really look into how do we electrify our fleet. If you want to go ahead to the next slide. So shout out to NYSERDA and to Tara's program. We were able to get started down this road using the NYSERDA Clean Energy Communities program. And we were the first quote unquote large community in Albany County in the Capital Region to become a designated clean energy community by completing a number of the actions, including benchmarking, PACE financing. And so that gave us access to an initial $250,000 and which was supplemented by a settlement of an additional 30 to launch what we called our pilot program. We procured 6 electric vehicles, 2020 Chevy Bolts, and 8 charging stations, 4 public and 4 fleet. Those were from ChargePoint. And in terms of picking out locations, we looked at a few things. Obviously, we looked at the map of where stations currently were spread throughout the county. We looked at, these were going on county properties. So where did we have county properties that filled a gap in terms of need and location? And then also factored in things like, what did we think would really have the volume to make the most sense to start? So the Times Union Center was kind of a no-brainer in terms of we have a lot of people during normal times coming to events there. And we also have state and county staff parking there. So it kind of serves a dual purpose. Same with our nursing home and our rail trail. Our Slingerlands trailhead is our most popular and also one of the most popular trailheads, I think, in the county and the region. So, and there's kind of an alignment between the green nature of the trail and the sustainability nature of the charging stations. I just want to pause. Is everyone hearing all right? Everything coming through okay on my phone? All right, great. And then one note that was helpful as we completed our application with the state was to get this off the ground. We wanted to provide essentially the electricity for free. And so we wrote into our grant a few $1,000s to subsidize that charging. We may have to start charging at some point, but at this point, it's still a free charge. Go ahead, next slide, please. Thanks. I just threw this one in. ChargePoint has a great online platform for data tracking, all kinds of different fun you can have with it. This was just the sessions in the last 365 days. Obviously, you can all figure out the cause for the drop off, but we were, if you look at it, averaging weekdays, maybe 6, 7, 8 sessions per day. I think at our Times Union Center, those would tend to be longer sessions, employees coming and parking, whereas at something like the rail trail or the nursing home, it would be a visitor. So more sessions of shorter duration. Go ahead, next slide. Thanks. And then the next section here, I just want to focus on a few lessons learned, and this is really a sort of just a shout out, but we relied heavily on our partners as we implemented this pilot program, primarily the clean energy community outreach coordinators and technical support. At the time, Robin Reynolds and then Tara seamlessly transitioned into that position, and also Tara, remind me of Jim Yanger's group when you're on, but climate advocates, I think, were very helpful in the process. But there's more. There are an array of grant opportunities that really make pilot programs feasible. I know I saw the toolkit has really all of them listed. It's really well put together. So if you haven't checked out the toolkit that Electrify NY put together, there's another plug, but it's really well done. And CDTC also has their Capital District Zero Emissions Vehicle Plan. So these are resources we use to get started, but also resources we'll look to continue going forward. Go ahead, next slide. So this is just one thing that we learned in terms of the actual installation is site work is really key, site work and adequate power supply. And I included this just to show you the delta of what it cost us to put the same charging station in at our nursing home versus the Times Union Center. And it ended up, it's an old parking garage, you're retrofitting as opposed to building new and integrating EVSE in the design. So we ended up having to drill through quite a bit of concrete to run power from where the power box was to where we wanted the charging stations to go. So this can really influence, choosing your locations carefully can really influence the project economics. As far as the Times Union Center, we didn't really have a choice. That's going to be a key hub for charging stations and electric vehicles going forward for us because it's where much of our fleet is based. So we knew we were going to be investing there. But, we still will have challenges, which I'll get to, in terms of making sure we have adequate power supply there. And that's something we're thinking about is, we tapped an existing box. That box, maybe we could get 2 more charging stations out of that sort of sub panel we put in. But if we're talking, talking big and talking the scale, I think everybody wants to see here throughout the region, that site work and power supply is an important factor. And then the other thing, because we're cloud connected, is we had to look into, is there internet access? as you go deeper into the parking garage, do you lose that? So these seem like small things, but it's the kind of things that as you're actually really diving into it, come up and you have to figure out. Go ahead, next slide. Last lessons learned. There are a number of different ways you can procure. The OGS Marketplace mini bid was great for the vehicles, and we actually found the best price for the charging stations was on what's now called the Sourcewell Cooperative Purchasing Program. Pay attention to build out dates with the vehicle procurement. We almost found ourselves in a precarious situation where they, was it a 2020 or a 2021, and how long were we going to have to wait? Thankfully, that all worked out. And then this last one I threw in, some people don't like change. So as you are integrating your electric vehicles into your fleet, there may be some pushback of people who just aren't used to it, or it's different, or, oh, that vehicle's small. It's just something that has to be overcome. But I think once most people drive them, they change their mind. But that was something that came up as we were piloting this. And the last thing, what we were trying to demonstrate, and by no means are we the first, but we wanted to scale up a little bit, that fully electric vehicles are very compatible with county operations. So that's the sort of the lessons learned section. And then go ahead, next slide. Thanks. What's next? I think this is really the important part here. Transitioning from what we call a pilot program to the new normal. And so this conversation was maybe a little bit different prior to COVID-19 and the impacts that's having on state, county, and all municipal and finances and the broader economy. But we're still looking at how do we go from all of our vehicles being state funded, which, trust me, I will gladly take, but is probably not totally realistic as we talk about the broader conversion of a fleet, to how do we incorporate that into our annual vehicle buy. And we procure our vehicles with, it's bond funded, it's not a lease, it's a capital investment. And so that's kind of what we're looking at right now. This is interesting timing, this panel for us, because we're in the midst of this conversation. I would love to say we have our new goals set and we have our new procurement plan. That was something that we probably would have been working on in April and May and June, and unfortunately had priorities that came up and took a lot of our time. But that's what we're in the midst of right now. It's still a pilot program until we start really investing in it. The use of the vehicles in our fleet has been primarily sort of low use vehicles. We try to get it up as much as we can, but what I want to do is, as we get more of these, integrate them to demonstrate how almost any county use, you can use a fully, at least in terms of a passenger vehicle, a fully battery electric vehicle. And similarly to, the first bullet, we're looking at what are our sustainability goals. Is it blank percentage by 2030, or is it, every time we go out for a bulk vehicle purchase, X percentage is electric? Those are things that we're toying with and need to, present something to internally of here's what we can afford and here's what state support is available. And so we'll certainly report back on that as we make progress. But our old goal had been 30%, and it included hybrid. And I think that has clearly been surpassed, and we're due to update and put a more aggressive goal in place. We think it's important for municipalities to lead by example. And we think, the last bullet I threw on there is, it's not all electric. If there are other clean transportation options that are out there, we'd certainly look at those. Go ahead, next slide. Thanks. And I'm going to try and wrap up quickly here, but two main challenges we're thinking about. One, I already touched on, but that site work piece, I think, you can get a pretty good sense for how much a vehicle costs and how much the actual charging station costs. And as I mentioned, there are grants available. We're interested to learn more about the Make Ready program that was just announced recently, which is significant funding. Does that allow you to pay for some of the site work, which can be sort of the go or no go piece in terms of really going from a couple charging stations here and there to a more a large scale build out. Important to have continued. At the end of the day, it's a little cynical, but it does come down to a budget and dollars and cents. And so any state support for that is very, or federal for that matter, is very helpful. I know in some cases partnering with utilities can be an option to address those site work or power supply constraints. And then last slide, the other challenge that we're thinking about is our heavy duty fleet. So we have sort of our day-to-day fleet for our our human services departments, those are passenger vehicles for the most part, but we also have public works and general services that, if we want to talk about fully electric, you have to talk about large plow vehicles, box trucks, the dump trucks, those where we're tracking the technology, but at this point it's a very high cost. So I know there are a couple local companies here in Albany County who are working on primarily the delivery trucks and buses, which seem to be a little bit more feasible at this point. We don't have at the county a huge use for those vehicles, but how can we get really into that medium and heavy duty space? There is the state truck voucher incentive program, which certainly helps. But, I think we're looking at, is there a way to pilot something locally that would demonstrate that and allow us in a way we can afford to move forward. So that's it for me. It sounds like we're doing question and answer at the end. So thank you for your time and look forward to hearing from the rest of the panelists.
Thank you so much, Lucas. And with that, we are going to transition over to Sandy.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Sandy Misowitz. I'm a transportation planner with the Capital District Transportation Committee, but I'm not here representing CDTC today. I am going to speak to my role with the Sustainability Advisory Committee in the City of Albany and what we're doing with electric vehicle research. Next slide. So the Sustainability Advisory Committee was established in 2014, and amongst its many tasks was to work on initiatives that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, make the city more efficient from an energy perspective, and support alternative transportation modes. We established one of several subcommittees at that time. I co-chair the transportation subcommittee. The city did back in 2012, a local electric vehicle feasibility study, which we used as sort of a foundational document to figure out how we can invest in and support electric vehicle infrastructure in the city. Most recently, in 2019, we conducted a survey of residents and people who work in the city of Albany. Next slide, please. And the survey was really intended to gauge what are the barriers and opportunities for owning and leasing electric vehicles, and also they're just using them generally. And what our survey found is the primary barriers were access to a charger and vehicle cost. Now, vehicle cost has come down over time. It's still a little out of reach for the demographics in our city for many residents. And the charger access is an issue because those who can afford electric vehicle also tend to be those that have driveways. And many of the folks that indicated that they own or lease an electric vehicle indicated that they charge them at home. And there's huge sections of the city of Albany that there are no driveways. People rely on street parking for their vehicles. So that was one of the barriers that we highlighted. The other thing we noticed from the survey is that most EV users have no idea how much energy their vehicle consumes. They have no idea when they plug in their vehicle what that actually amounts to from even a dollars and cents point of view. So when we ask the question, how much would you be willing to pay if you had to pay for a charge? Notably, the answer was between $2 and $4, which aligns right to the cost of a gallon of gasoline, because that's their only reference point. So that was an interesting thing to learn that I think a lot of users don't fully understand that aspect of electric vehicle ownership and leasing. Next slide, please. So this map shows the current locations of charging stations in the city. The vast majority of these are located on institutional properties such as colleges and universities, some of the state and county office buildings. Albany Parking Authority has electric vehicle charging stations in a lot of their lots and are planning on more. And then private companies, things like the Honest Way Food Co-op. The city recently integrated in their Sustainable Development Ordinance electric vehicle charging parking requirements. So we're seeing some of the newer apartment developments incorporating EV chargers. So they have gone up over the years. But as you can also see in the map, many of the dots align to where our commercial corridors are and where these institutions are. When you get into the neighborhoods, there's not as much, if any, publicly available infrastructure. And again, that part of that is in the sections of the city that has a driveway, they're charging them in their driveways. But for the sections of the city that don't, we see gaps. And when we're thinking long-term about electrifying the fleet, this is a concern. Next slide, please. So where we're at now in the city, Jason West is actually part of the conversation today. Hi, Jason. He is the new city energy manager. And right now we have a small group of folks working together to research potential public charger locations that would be on city-owned property, whether they be public buildings, maybe the libraries, maybe there's a few other locations that we're exploring. And really researching and identifying the maintenance and installation needs, a lot of which were highlighted in Albany County's presentation. We are pursuing some funding opportunities through National Grid, perhaps some other grant opportunities. And, you know, I think the Transportation Subcommittee's interest is looking forward, how do we address this barrier to implementing charging infrastructure on public streets? And what are we going to do in cities like Albany that have a look and feel in some sections to Brooklyn, but don't have the opportunity for charging infrastructure, you know, in private parking lots and what have you. So I think, you know, having Jason on board has been extremely helpful in terms of championing this in the city. And I feel that, you know, moving forward, the city will be making, you know, more inroads on this. Cost is a constant concern for all local governments, particularly right now with COVID-19 and how that's impacting local budgets. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to get a couple of these charging stations funded through one of the state programs. But long-term, big picture, I think we have to look at other opportunities to partner with residents, with business owners on providing the infrastructure needed to really create a fleet and foster an environment where that concern about accessing a charger is not as much of a concern anymore. Next slide. That's all I had, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. That was very informative. And next up, we have Rich Bolo.
Hi, how are you? I was alderman for the city of Hudson last couple of years. Alderman is like city council person. I had no prior experience or anything else going into this, going into the job. And someone said to me at one of the conferences I attended that, oh, you should go for this Charge New York grant that's out there now. I'm like, oh, okay. So we applied. The city of Hudson's only 6,000 people. We have a large tourist population that comes here usually during the summertime. And anyway, so let's go to the next slide. So what we did is I ended up applying for the Charge Ready, which we ended up getting 3 charging units. So there's 3 chargers with 6 ports, 2 ports per charger. So there's 3 of those. You see on the picture, there's 3 of them there. We ended up getting the grants through Charge New York, and then National Grid gave us the grants for the digging, which included, you know, a new electrical box, a trench out to that parking island. So the whole thing was paid for by grants. For those of you who are unfamiliar, I'm sure everyone already knows, but you know, we chose these are the most popular ones. You know, there was options, but you know, Teslas have an adapter nowadays, so that's fine. We put it right. We put all of them right behind City Hall, which is really in the middle of town, so it's very walkable. And it's something else to keep in mind, like you already know. People want to be able to leave them, go to dinner or lunch and charge, and then, you know, maybe spend the day and then come back. So that's a consideration. We met with, you know, National Grid, and, you know, we scouted out different locations. We charge, the city of Hudson charges $1.75 an hour, which translates into about 25-ish miles per hour. So if you figure that's roughly a little bit cheaper than a gallon of gasoline, if you're getting 25 miles an hour on your per gallon. We also did, I just pulled that number out because that's what Lake George was charging. So we're like, okay, fine, we'll charge that too. The maintenance on those, just so everyone probably knows, it's like $600 per year per charger. So it's an $1,800 a year cost. So that $1.75 right now. I think at this point we're just covering cost, but you know, we're looking at like a long-term solution. As a city official, we had to put out an RFP. We had to look at different contractors. So we ended up with Plug-in Stations, who was amazing to work with. They basically just did all of the project management work, as well as, you know, after everything goes in place, you have to configure the charge point system. And the big thing just to keep in mind if you're doing this is just keep those grant deadlines in mind, because you know, it's nice and fun to get everything in, and then you sometimes get distracted. But the charge point grant money, you know, you obviously have to fill in all the rest of the paperwork and make sure everything comes in on time. So that was a little, I mean, we made just something, an FYI, as a little lessons learned that I probably next time more aware of that. So let's go on to the next slide. So here's a little schematic of where we actually put them in. The that blue square is the electrical box. There's the municipal parking lot, the 3 lightning bolts, so the 3 charging stations. We hired a contractor to dig the trench. That's what National Grid paid for. You know, we also have these signs up just to tell people, you know, that for what they're being used for. We do have parking meters, which are still there. So you have to charge, and we still ask people to put a physical quarter into the meter as well. Well, I do like to recommend a little parking island, only because then you can park the car in front or behind the charger and still use them. That's, I mean, something to think about. The treasurer's office, that was an issue that we didn't really think about how do we actually take this money in? I know that sounds minor, but sometimes it's good just to give your treasurer a heads up on where they, sometimes they create a budget item. And then we actually did have to replace 2 of them a few months afterwards, because they were just not connecting to the grid. Even though they were operational and giving out a charge, they weren't connecting, or people weren't being charged. But there's a 6-month maintenance warranty, so they were easily replaced. And it's just a matter of working with all the different departments within your local municipality to make this happen. Like I said, Hudson's only 6,000 people, so there really aren't that many people to work with. But I did get some pushback too on this, because the month before they went in, my own personal car died on me, and I had to get a new car. I'm like, well, I just put in these charger stations, so of course I am gonna get an all-electric car now. So I did that, and then the pushback I got from local residents was that, oh, well, you just did this for yourself. I'm like, oh, no, folks, no, anyway. So yes. And people think that there's many other things that you could be working on as opposed to electric car charging stations. Anyway, let's go to the next slide. So the other thing that I pushed through that same year was that we now have the city of Hudson now will be buying all of its electricity from a local solar farm, which is right outside of town. It saves us 10% on all our municipal electricity costs, which include streetlights. And the big plus to that is to say that now you can charge your car with electricity that is being generated from the local solar farm. So you now have a totally carbon neutral form of transportation here in the city of Hudson. So that's it. It was a fun experience, and I recommend it. And if anyone has any questions, or you can always email me or let me know. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. And I appreciate you making the connection between where the energy is sourced, because that definitely has an impact as well. So our last presenter is Tara, and I will let you take it away.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Tara Donadio, and I'm a Clean Energy Communities Outreach Coordinator for the NYSERDA Clean Energy Communities Program. I work for the Capital District Regional Planning Commission. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the EV free technical support that we provide that some of the presenters have alluded to. So we're glad to be helpful in this program. And then the funding for municipalities that are available out there. So kind of the steps that we guide them through. Next slide. So just an introduction to the Clean Energy Communities Program for those of you that aren't aware. The Capital District Regional Planning Commission works throughout the entire Eastern Territory of New York State. But as today we're just focusing on the Capital Region, you can see there that we have 56 participating communities, 41 designated communities in the region, and over 192 actions completed, which I'll talk a little bit more about those actions, or you can see a list of them. But EV charging stations and EV vehicles is under the Clean Fleets action, which is one of those items. Next slide. So the program is open enrollment for any municipality. So there was funding for up to $250,000 available for communities, which Luke had mentioned that was what Albany County had received. That money was first come, first serve, and as the program started in 2016, it's gone. But we are hearing good news about the potential for more programs very shortly, so we'll be excited to announce that as soon as we hear more from NYSERDA. And basically, to get that money, communities have to do 4 out of 10 high impact action items. Next slide. And here's a list of those action items. So you can see there's a whole different range of things communities can do, but one of those, and obviously the focus of this webinar, is clean fleets. Basically, clean fleets, to achieve this action item, communities need to either install a 2-port charging station or purchase an electric vehicle or a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. So you can see kind of a smaller map there, basically showing you the number of communities that have done this throughout the Capital Region. We've had 25 participating communities, so 25 communities have either purchased an electric vehicle or installed an EV charging station, and 23 of those were actually designated in the program and received some funds. Next slide. So when a community comes to us and is interested in the program, or there are some communities that just approach us about electric vehicles in general, knowing about our free assistance that we provide, we basically have to kind of help them figure out why electric vehicles or charging stations are something that's going to be useful for their community. I would say the majority of communities, the large majority, are just going to be installing EV infrastructure as part of this program, if only because of the cost. They're just trying, many of them are just trying to achieve that action item, so they just want to, kind of check the box. And of course, purchasing an electric charging station is going to be quite a bit less than purchasing a fleet vehicle. So the first thing we, typically kind of focus on when talking about EV infrastructure is the economic development case. So really just talking about, how can this electric vehicle charger bring people to your community? How can it bring people through your community if you're a rural community? So, trying to kind of make that case that people may want to stop in your town, and this may help them spend some money, especially with a level 2 charger where they may have to spend a couple of hours doing their charging. So the second part of this is kind of the EV registration map that NYSERDA has, which kind of allows these communities to see the number of registered vehicles in their community, so their constituents that actually have electric vehicles. You can see here, this is Albany County. There's 1,150 vehicles on the road, so that many residents in the county that are going to be taking advantage of those stations. So. And then on to the fleet electric vehicles, I would say the number one reason to do this is going to be the payback and the cost savings in the long run. It's kind of a sticker shock for communities when they first see the price of an electric vehicle versus, a traditional gas. But as you can see here with this New York City study, over the long run, the gas vehicle is going to cost more as far as maintenance goes and, all types of things. So it really is just kind of giving them a cost benefit analysis and showing them what it's going to be over the long run. Next slide. So when a community decides that they want to move forward with this, it's really a matter of trying to help them figure out what they need, what would work best for them, and what some of the options are when looking at these technologies. So with EV infrastructure, it's going to be, do you want a level 2 or a level 3 charger? And in most of these cases, it's going to be a level 2 because of the cost. And it really mostly just comes down to the cost for that. I think level 3s are wonderful and they would definitely help communities, but also one of the benefits of level 2 is that you can keep people around for longer. So if you're trying to make that economic development case to keep people spending money in your community, they're going to have to spend a bit more time with a level 2. Now looking at the smart or basic chargers, basically this comes down to who's using the charger. If you're using it for fleet vehicles, then you probably just need a basic charger that doesn't allow for charging of customers or kind of the tracking aspect of things. Whereas if it's a public facing charger, you're going to need that smart infrastructure for being able to set fees and things like that, which, as Rich alluded to, they can be costly. So you need to be able to cover your costs for both the subscription fees long-term as well as the cost of the electricity. And then as far as fleet electric vehicles go, it's kind of just evaluating the community's comfort level. So looking at a hybrid versus a full electric vehicle. I worked with a community that was a rural community in Columbia County that decided on a hybrid electric. and they went with the Mitsubishi Outlander, which is an all-wheel drive vehicle, because it was a code enforcement officer that was spending a lot of time on the roads, and obviously our winters here felt more comfortable with an all-wheel drive, and also that backup gas in case something happened. And then for you know, some of the city vehicles, and obviously Albany County did this as well, some of the smaller all-electric vehicles can work just fine as well. Next slide. So I guess the most important aspect of this really, and you know, the only reason many communities are going to be able to do electric vehicle infrastructure and charging stations comes down to the funding sources that are available. And there are a few out there. So my role, along with my my colleague Jill Henk, who we both work as coordinators in the region, is basically to help communities kind of look at the decisions I was talking about previously, but also understand some of the funding sources that are available. And we do provide free technical support, so we're able to help them put together the grant applications, do some of the quarterly reporting, especially for the DEC rebates, and just kind of help them navigate the process of finding an installer and doing an RFP if that's a requirement for the community, going through the OGS bid process, which can be a bit complex. So we've done this quite a number of times now, so that's some of the support we can provide. But as far as these funding sources go, the one on the left there you'll see is the DEC's ZEV, or Zero Emissions Vehicle Rebate. It provides funding for EV cars and infrastructure, and it's just for municipalities, so it's very specific in that case. As I mentioned, there is 2 years of quarterly reporting for this process, which can be a bit daunting for some communities, depending on who is managing this process and you know, who this kind of falls on. And then for the infrastructure, it's going to be a 20% match communities must provide. And for cars, it's anywhere from $2,500 to $5,000, depending on the mile range of the vehicle. Now for the NYSERDA program, they have a Charge Ready New York rebate, which is $4,000 per port for a level 2 charger. This process is, just from experience, quite a bit easier to go through for municipalities. They basically just have to fill out an application process, and they don't have to do that quarterly reporting going forward. And this is available for municipalities and workplaces of greater than 15 employees. So it's kind of a broader initiative. And then of course, I'll mention the Clean Energy Communities program as well, which as I mentioned, does not have any funding at the moment, but did provide funding for up to $250,000 of match-free funding for communities. Albany County was one of those examples, and I'm just gonna show you a list on the next page too when I get to that. And then finally, the initiative that a few of the presenters have talked about is the make-ready costs for utilities. National Grid was providing $5,000 per port for make-ready costs, which is still available, but is very shortly, the pilot program of that I think is ending, and there will be more funding is what we're hearing. But basically this kind of covers the other part of the charging. So you're looking at the $4,000 per port, or the 80% that DC provides. This can actually be combined with that as well. So it's kind of a big thing, and it can sometimes cover the entire cost of the charging station for communities. Next slide. And then just a list here of some of the communities that we've helped in the Capital Region as part of the Clean Energy Communities program. Some that have publicly available charging stations, obviously the fleet EVs, and then some EV fleet stations that have been installed as part of the Clean Energy Communities program. And there certainly may be some on here that we're missing, so I apologize if there's one that you guys noticed that's not on here, but just kind of giving you the number of communities that have decided to move forward with us, which I think is just really good. So next slide. And that is all I have. So I will take questions, I guess, when we're ready to take questions, but thank you all so much. And please reach out if you have anything in the future.
Great, thank you so much. We are at the question taking portion. So if anyone has a question for any of the presenters, feel free to either raise your hand through the reaction option at the bottom of your screen or go ahead and type it directly into the chat. And I'm not seeing any questions immediately, but I do have a question for you, Tara. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the new EV infrastructure order that was put out by the Public Service Commission. They have a number of what will be exciting programs, so I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Mhm. So I don't know too much about it, but I do believe, and I may be wrong about this, but I did hear from someone that some of that funding is potentially going to be going to the utilities for extending these make-ready grants and these types of programs. So I think that that's going to be useful, and I think that has been a useful program. So I really do hope that they do that. But unfortunately, I don't know too much more about what else the funding is going to be used for in those types of things yet. So I look forward to hearing more.
Great, thank you. And then Alex had a question. Is there a way for members of the public in New York State to learn whether their own communities or neighboring communities are clean energy communities?
Yes, there most certainly are. So if you go to NYSERDA's Clean Energy Communities, you can actually probably just Google it, NYSERDA Clean Energy Communities Program. They have a wonderful map, and those screenshots that I took were just of you know, a portion of the map, but you can it's an active map, and you can kind of explore it and click on the dots and see what communities have done, and see if your community is one of those. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then we have a question from Daniel, which is, has anyone priced out the idea of putting outlets on streetlights? If you limited the flow to a 1 kilowatt or so, wouldn't that be a lot cheaper than installing some of these fancier charging stations? I'm not sure who would like to take that question. Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, but that would take days too to charge. I mean, to get a full charge, it takes about what, 4 days or something for our level 1.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm thinking about, I live in Center Square, right? You know, we're a dense downtown neighborhood. I drive an electric car with, like, you know, it only has like 60-mile range that will charge completely in 10 hours. And the point is, almost everyone, hardly anyone drives much more than that on an average day. So you keep it topped up all the time, you charge it overnight. You know, the point, I'm not saying this as a, you know, obviously you need the higher capacity chargers in other places, but, you know, if we're talking about having, you know, essentially every car being an electric in 20 years, we got to be thinking about the overall cost. So
I can say CDTC in my day job, we've looked at that. The problem in an older city like Albany is most of your streetlights are old and don't have the infrastructure to even do that. So the cost, that's one piece of the cost question. The other piece of it is it's not your personal parking space. And so when you're putting that in on a public street, if you can't dedicate it to just that use, it's not quite that simple. So it's not that it hasn't been looked at. I think there's got to be some more creative thinking with that approach.
I mean, my point was at 1 kilowatt, you know, over a year, that's like $800, even if we're plugged in all the time. So.
Right, but you still have to install the infrastructure, actually do it. Yeah.
The other thing I would mention too, that we help communities with the LED streetlight upgrades, and one of the components of that is that municipalities don't always own their streetlights, so it's the utility. And even when they purchase their streetlights, they're only going to purchase like the upper part, you know, kind of whereas the pole typically remains with the utility. So it would be a matter of that utility kind of feeling comfortable with the charging infrastructure there, I think is something.
We have to socialize the utilities is the actual problem, because National Grid is pretty useless, but that's,
Right.
Yeah, utilities do play a big role in this transition. So we have a question for Luke, what is the difference between the more expensive EVSE and the less expensive one at the nursing home station? Was it all construction costs that made up for such a stark difference in cost?
In terms of the installation, yeah, I mean, the EV itself, or the charging station itself, they're identical. So it was simply the that cost that I laid out did not include the actual cost of the charging station. That was just basically the electrical work to allow us to put in the charging station. So, you know, it's a leg, sort of to the previous question a little bit. It's a legacy of retrofitting old infrastructure to try and integrate new technology, which is what needs to be done, but can be costly.
Thank you for that. And then we do have another question. What's the difference between a participating and a designated clean energy community?
Sure, so I'll take that. A participating community is just one that has started the program but hasn't done 4 high impact actions. So to be designated, they need to achieve 4, whereas many just did 1 or 2 and haven't gotten there yet. So.
Great, thank you. Just gonna leave some space in case anyone was waiting to get their question in. And take the opportunity to say thank you so much to all the presenters. This was very valuable information, and it was great to hear from people that are actually doing the work about how to get the work done.
Thanks for hosting it.
everyone.
And just, I know there was a question about the PSC order. On their website, if you go to their front page and then go down to electric vehicles, that you will see both the press release, which is probably what you want to look at because it's about 2 pages, and also the order, which is about 260 pages of all the information you could ever ask for. So just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you. Well, with no further questions, I'm happy to wrap up this panel. Again, thank you so much to everybody that participated. And as this is recorded, we'll be able to get it out to folks if they would like it.
We're happy to send out resources as well. So there will be a follow-up email after this webinar ends.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.